Okay, so part two here, Ali. So I'll repeat the question that I had put to you, which is, you know, why I had suggested we talk at this particular time, but we already spent about almost an hour with other preliminaries, which for themselves I thought fascinating. But now let's try to focus on what I originally wanted to speak with you about. So I was saying that even though somebody like myself, especially, has devoted themselves to the amoral program of ridding one's psyche and behavior of moralistic, attitudes and speech and so forth, moral anger, outrage, all that kind of thing, judgmentalism, blah, blah, blah. I have to report after 15 years of working on this, I'm still, as liable as ever to get moralistic spontaneously. I'm certainly much better, because the thought hadn't even occurred to me over 15 years ago, at correcting for that afterwards, and calming it down pretty quickly. But there's no question that I still bear in my mind moralism. I'm constantly judging people. I'm constantly judging myself, which takes the form of feeling morally guilty about this, that, the other thing. And, an amoralist like me and other people wants to get rid of all that. It doesn't serve any particularly good purpose, and it sure causes a lot of awful, wreaks havoc with a lot of stuff. Okay, so I was saying to you, because you are a psychotherapist, I was saying I, as a philosopher, was trying to persuade people with rational argument to become amoralistic. But I could see in my own case, a person like myself who knows the rational arguments inside and out, it hasn't, performed the miracle with me. So why should I expect it to perform the miracle with anybody else? So I thought maybe you, as a psychotherapist, might then be the next avenue of recourse, as somebody who could say, oh, yes, in fact, what you are describing there, Joel, is not at all peculiar to the phenomenon of moralism. It's more broadly to be understood as an emotional problem, and people commonly, have deep-seated emotions that they would be better off without, or at least moderating. But, the best case would be just get rid of them entirely. What would be like things like envy? Well, see, that gets a little tricky, because maybe when you get right down to it, all the emotions we might want to get rid of are actually moralistic emotions. That's a little wrinkle there. But bracket that one for the moment. All right, I'm just trying to make the case that you might say, well, Joel, that's just an emotional issue. And of course, as a psychotherapist, that's my bread and butter. So yes, if somebody had a problem with grief, let's say they had a problem with grief and they couldn't get over grieving for their lost spouse, and it's been 10 years, yes, of course they would come to me as a psychotherapist. And if somebody is a moralist, of course they would come. I'm the right person. They would come to me, and I would try to help them, get over that too. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I would absolutely think that you could use psychotherapy to help. And you think about grief as well. Grief is a lot of times grief comes with the feeling of, I could have helped this person and I didn't, and I'm a bad person for not being able to do that. So you got a
my
good example.
tangential remark before that. Well, maybe all the problem emotions are in fact moralistic emotions. Now there's a hypothesis, right?
I think some of the most anguish and pain in people come from times where they really felt that they could have done better and they hadn't, and there's a lot of regret and pain and self-hatred, and I wish I could have saved that person, I wish I could have helped that person, why wasn't I there for that person? Far more causes of anger, self-hatred, and I think it causes depression as well. But that comes up a lot. But yeah, absolutely. I think someone could if they wanted to rid themselves of some of their moralistic emotions. I'm not saying all of them, but I think psychotherapy could help look at some of the situations where you might behave moralistic and think about different ways those situations could have gone. Or even just simple exercises like, so for me, I'm thinking about the fly tipping example of the person throwing junk in the field, thinking about that person's life story, potentially, like why did they do this? What was their thinking behind what they did, and maybe understanding their story and seeing if I can empathize with them somewhat to get rid of they're awful people and they're dreadful people. I'm not so sure how far you can go with that, because you could maybe understand Hitler's life story, and that's probably not going to make you think that he was a fine person at the end of you being able to do that. But it would definitely help in other cases. I'm thinking actually, a driving instructor once told me, if someone's up behind you and they're beeping at you and they're raising their fists, come on, why won't you go faster? You could maybe think of a story like, maybe this person wants to go so fast because they're driving to meet one of their dying relatives or something like that. Just a way of me calming down so I can move over into the other lane and let that person be angry if they want to be. But that's a way of me calming down. I can see you nodding then. Is that kind of resonating with you a little bit?
This is terrific. This is absolutely terrific. And in the process of your, answering really my question, you've come up with another hypothesis, which, gosh, my latest book on this subject was just published, but I wish I could add this.
No.
Uh,
No.
this calls for another book, or at least an article, and you are going to write it. I'm serious. If you don't, you're a bad person. But okay, gosh, there's so much. Whenever you open your mouth, there's so much. So let me try to get to organize my thoughts about your thoughts. Okay, first, you directly answered my question that yes, indeedy, your field of psychotherapy could be helpful for people who are having a problem with their moralism. Okay, great. And then you started to give a detailed answer of specific techniques that you might suggest that would help people. Okay, and we could pursue that. Although again, that would make perfect a chapter or chapters of a book right there to go into the details of that kind of therapy, with giving examples of people having moralistic issues, and then how you would suggest the various ways, because you spoke of different kinds of ways of treating this, right? You spoke about kind of a hands-on, where somebody is actually, right now, how can I change my thinking to help me right now in this situation? But then you were also suggesting a more deep psychoanalytic analysis. Well, let's go back to your childhood or some traumatic experience in the past to see where this may have come from, right? So those are two distinct kinds of approaches. So again, these could be two different chapters of this book, all right? But then in our discussion, a second hypothesis arose, which I just find so exciting and so promising, which is that when you get right down to it, maybe all of the emotional issues that people typically come to a psychotherapist to deal with are moralistic emotions, or have morality somehow at the root of them. Do you realize how incredibly significant that would be if that were the case? I mean, what an exciting hypothesis that is, Ali. I mean, has that crossed your mind before in an explicit fashion?
I think there's lots of themes that I've toyed around with, but I don't think I don't think I've formulated it, or you've maybe formulated it that clearly, but I don't think I've thought about it that clearly.
Because something prompted you to reach out to me. That's how we met, right? I get an email out of the blue from Oliver Alston, and I often get emails out of the blue, which is wonderful. People come across my work, contact me, and I always try to respond. But of course, with some people, it's like, okay, thank you. Yeah, or I answer a question. But with some people like you, it's like, wow, this is an interesting person here. Well, these are some interesting ideas. And so we just, we've developed quite a dialogue now as a result of that. So something must have prompted you. I think you had even said in the email that you thought that this amoral, anti-moral theme would somehow resonate with your professional work as a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
So could this be what was at the bottom of that impulse you had?
Right, right, and meeting people, meeting clients who had these same kinds of self-hatred, um, these like, I wish I could have done this differently. I wish that this would have come out, really, real. They were moralizing against themselves more than anything, um, and thinking themselves as being evil people or bad people. And I think that really spoke to me about helping these people by getting them to strip away some of that moralism that they're directing towards themselves, which I think is, although Rogers doesn't talk in these terms, I think it's in the background of what Carl Rogers is talking about. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. But also you must have people who come to you, or maybe they have to see you. I don't know what sorts of clients you take on, because they have issues of directing their moralism at others.
That's
Right?
easier, I think.
Okay, but I mean, you get that too.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So in
100%.
other words, so the moralism would be across the board. The people
Yeah.
who are coming to you with these, anger issues against others, or the others who are, consumed in guilt or whatever, or grief, et cetera, across the board, at the root of it, to mix metaphors, uh, would be moralism.
Mhm. And almost helping them to realize that their moralism is, go back to that word, impotent, that really it's the person who they are, have these moralistic feelings towards, that's the person they need to be talking to, overcoming their feelings towards, rather than just this impotent rage of they're evil, they're wrong, they slighted me. um, I, I don't know what you think of that, Joel.
I didn't quite catch that. Say that again now.
The kind of moral evaluations that they do have.
Of
um,
others, you mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. What about it now?
The impotence of the impotent moral evaluation of, rather than addressing the situation or
Oh, right,
addressing the
right,
other
right, right,
person.
right. Well, yeah, I mean but again, for me, that's the common denominator of what's wrong with moral expression and moral attitudes. That they are, you use the word impotent, they're superfluous, they're a double, a useless double. And the real business that needs to be attended to is something else.
Hmm. Yeah.
But see, the reason I wanted to raise the discussion with you before we discover this second hypothesis here, which is possibly, probably even much more significant than the first one. Well, or maybe the first one I brought up, it's just that in terms of logical sequence would come second. All right. Because first is identifying that a person has a problem with morality or moralism, and then would come, well, how do we treat it? And so I had originally asked you about, is this an effective treatment? Would you be offering a kind of treatment for moralism? But the earlier, logically prior question would be, are people coming to you with moral problems. And it sounds like you're saying, just in every case, that's exactly the kind of problem they're coming to me with. And so now if we get to the second part of the progression, okay, well, how do we treat that? Well, then it seems like, well, are there two things or is there one thing to treat now? Because my original thought had been, you could help people get rid of this impotent, superfluous moralism. Okay, but then there's also the question of, well, then now that we've gotten rid of that, then there's the real problem they have that really needs to have some work. They miss somebody or something, they're sad, grief, or somebody did something they didn't like, and they got angry and so forth. But I guess they collapse into one, don't they? I mean, would you go so far as to say or hypothesize now that given that morality seems to be the root cause of, the main issues that people come to a therapist about, that once we can deal with that moralism, the rest takes care of itself. Then the grief will no longer be a problem. Then the anger will no longer be a problem.
Or they might be in a situation where they can then go and sort the problem out.
Okay, see, that's what my original hunch had been, that there are two things to deal with. Let's get the distraction out of the way, the moralism. And now, I think I said this to you before, at the very end of, I think it's Philip Roth's book, Portnoy's Complaint.
I've wanted to read this.
Yeah, I think we had this exchange briefly on a prior occasion. At the end of it, I shouldn't admit that I've read that book. It's a really dirty, well, we could say it's literature, so that's okay.
I think Philip Roth is sort of considered literature. He's on the
But anyway,
cusp, isn't he?
Yeah, I had mixed feelings about that book. I love some other Roth, and I don't like some other Roth, but that book I had mixed feelings about, but it's certainly entertaining. So, but at the very end of the book, the book is supposedly the guy telling a psychologist, about his problems. And then at the end of the book, the psychologist says, all right, and now we can get to work. He's got some kind of Germanic accent, now we can get to the. So once you had spent 3 years helping people get over their moralism, getting that out of the way, now we can get to work. Okay, let me give you some
it's normally at that point where the work has already been done.
That's what, again, which is it, Ollie? That's what I said.
Yeah.
Will the work then have been done? I suspect not, really. I suspect that because look, okay, the person's spouse died 10 years ago and they're still grieving, okay? Then you finally get to the bottom of this and you help them figure out that the intensity of the grief and the reason they're holding on to the grief is that they feel guilty. They could have done something to help or they feel bad because just before the person died, they'd had a terrible argument or something like that, and so they feel guilty. So you've convinced them after 3 years that the guilt. Now, remember, there are two different ways you can help them here. One is on the strictly moralistic plane and say, you didn't do anything wrong. Or what you did, yeah, but it was just, it was a fluke. You had an argument. Yeah, you shouldn't have been so angry with him at the time, but and then he died. It was just an unfortunate serendipity. You shouldn't feel terribly, terribly guilty about it. You're still a good person. See, that would that would be one approach. But the other approach, which is the kind you came to me about, as your philosophical therapist, was to convince them that morality is a myth. Now, maybe you don't have to go that far, right?
And though I couldn't help but notice when you said, "Well, you shouldn't feel guilty." You said that. Strictly speaking,
No, but see, you're speaking as a moralist, is what I'm saying.
and strictly speaking, like a Rogerian psychotherapist, they don't use words like should and shouldn't. Um, so, and I don't know whether that's just an added bit of, complexity.
No,
But
that's
there
what
are,
they mean. They're in effect being amoralists. Do you think that's true?
yeah, like advice was a complete no-no. Although it's very hard to practice that way, but
Hey, no. But my point is, whether or not the therapist was using the word should or not,
oh,
is the therapist trying to persuade the client that in the moral realm, which we're leaving intact, the client is not guilty, or at least it's not a big sin. Yeah, they're a little guilty of something. It would have been better if it hadn't happened,
yeah,
but they didn't commit a big sin. Or is the therapist really trying to get away from morality entirely? There's no such thing as sin, right, moral right and wrong in an objective sense. Which do you think it is for the Rogerian?
I think they're trying to show the client that there is a different way of being, essentially. Uh, Um, but I don't think that it's something that you can. Yes, obviously, it's not something that you can like force an ideology onto the client, but you can show them in the way that you are with them that this is another way of being. Um,
All
I
right.
don't.
Oh
Yeah,
no, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay. So we got a lot of balls in the air here. But I think this is really making beautiful sense. And has great practical value. Are you feeling that are you getting as excited as I am?
100%. No, 100%. And I think the grief is that a moral emotion. It's going to be definitely going to be something it's definitely going to be something I need to think about. Um, and it would, like I say, it'd be nice to see it written about as well.
It has to be. I mean, I won't say it ought to be. It should be. But if I were a moralist, I would certainly say that. Um, I just think it would be, I'd love to see it. And I think it would be helpful to a lot of people, including the therapy. It could start a whole new school of Alstonian therapy. Absolutely. Alstonian therapy. It started right here on our show, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, I think this is true. I mean, not that I know your field that well, but I think this is a fantastic idea. But again, okay, just now we're getting to fine points because I think we've really laid the foundation here. I would still think it might be possible that morality was at the root of somebody's problem. But then even if you got rid of that, sometimes a problem just takes on a life of its own. So you might still, even if you then really convince them that morality is something to put aside here. Let's get rid of that. They may still have a problem because their whole psyche has adapted to this new way of thinking about life, or their whole worldview. And it's got all kinds of shoots that have spread out into other areas, And so now they're going to have to deal with they're going to have to clean up after the mess, right? And somebody who lost their husband, after 10 years later, still grieving. Okay, now they suddenly realize, okay, I guess I'm not guilty, or that's not a good way to think about it, Well, but they still now they can finally face the fact they're alone, right? And now that has a lot of concrete meaning. Aside from the moralism, they have to learn how to live alone or how to find somebody else. and so forth, right?
Hmm.
So that's the sense in which now we can begin, you see?
Hmm.
This is the stuff we should now, whoops, not should. This is the stuff now we want to be working on, right?
I mean, that's the point where even though the psychotherapists are saying that's where we should begin, that's almost the point where they almost leave the scene, because that's where the individual has their own work to do.
Oh, I see. I see. Oh, you don't think, well, well, after a while, of course. But I mean, not immediately. I mean, wouldn't you want there to be there when the person reports back to you and says, "Oh, well, I tried this and I tried that," and then you could fine tune it a little more?
Yeah, I think it's a good point as well, because I think a lot of the time psychotherapy is thought of as the place where you share the worst things that have ever happened to you, but actually to share the things that you're working on and that you're improving on.
Absolutely. I would think so. Absolutely. Absolutely.
In fact, for me, when I went to therapy for the first few times, it was nice to have a place where I could tell someone about the good things that happened in my life, because I found it weird to tell someone about that.
Ah,
So yeah,
wow. Interesting. The good things, not just the bad things.
yeah, because I found like whenever I shared the good things that had happened in my life, it was almost what am I looking for? Almost like I was showing off, like I was bragging.
Um,
I don't know.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, see, different people have different kinds of problems depending upon their society, their upbringing, this, right. Yeah. So, uh, yeah. Wow. So, well, really, every single person on earth should have a therapist, right? I mean, it'd be nice in the sense you're talking about, where the things you're not able to express and deal with and work out in your local environment, or now, well, of course, now we have the world environment. Now anybody can get online, and they've literally got the whole world of human beings to interact with about anything they want. So that's another sense in which they might not need a therapist anymore, because they could find somebody to talk about anything with, right?
It does seem to create new problems.
That's
Um,
true too.
and I guess thinking about the impotence thing, it creates people hating the actions of those people who live,
Well,
thousands
that's
of.
of course you. All right. So you're never going to go out of business, at least if the
Yeah.
world is sane enough to recognize that your kind of knowledge and skills can be helpful to people. Of course, so-called mental health uh, is not given sufficient attention in most, maybe any society, not giving the funding it needs, not giving the kind of respect that is given to so-called, what do you call it, physical health, medical conditions. Um, just when people have problems of life where they want to discuss with somebody, uh, it's definitely low down on the totem pole. I suppose it's considered that it could be subversive. That could be another reason why it's not just being neglected, it could actually be being suppressed. Because once people start to open up about things that their society does not normally allow them or encourage them to talk about, well, then you can get into dangerous territory, right?
And I think a massive thing is expression of emotions being very taboo, particularly in workplace situations. I
Well,
think a lot of.
in some society, in some, in
Right.
others, definitely not at all, right?
I think ours, there's difficulty with emotions, difficulty understanding or having powerful
Society,
feelings.
by your society, I mean, like, what we call it, English, British, what would you call your society?
Yeah, yeah, British.
Well, they probably like well, they're stereotypically anyway, they're considered to be reserved, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but
right.
I'm saying if you grew up in I don't know, where would it be, in the Caribbean or something, I mean, there wouldn't, I mean, again, this is just another stereotype, I suppose, but I think of them as people who are or Mediterranean people, like my heritage, right? Very emotional and expressive all the time.
Mm, mm.
that's their problem. That goes overboard very easily.
Oh, yeah, it's problems, or we've all
Yeah.
got problems. Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason to expect any human beings to be together, or centered, to use these, the lingo, because uh, we're all just accidents, right? Our species is an evolutionary accident. We were not designed by an omniscient, omnipotent, benevolent creator. And individually, we are all, furthermore, the result of countless contingent occurrences. So it would be a miracle if any individual human being was completely coordinated,
And
physically
probably
and
it's
mentally.
probably a very boring miracle as well.
Well, that's a point too, isn't it? Yeah, we there probably are novels which are trying to capture what the ideal person would be, and probably it will turn out the novel would have a surprise, a zinger like that, where it turns out they're the perfect person,
Mm.
Go on.
Right now, I wouldn't be reading that novel.